Song for the Imps. How about a song for the Imps? There we go then. Come on, let's get some of the lads together. Let's have a good old sing song, yeah. Okay, yeah, all right. Come on, fellas. Get around the piano. Let's have a good go. Come on, then. Are you ready? Come on, you lot. Go on, then.
Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Lincoln City are the team, the Radiance is their name. Stinsel Bank is their home ground and football is their game. So come and cheer them on, you lads, support them all the way. Oh, 'tis our delight for the red and white. The Imps are here to stay. Oh, 'tis our...
Morning all, how we doing? It's good to see you. 17 of you already. Get an alert on your phone and go, I'd better watch that ginger bearded geezer do a chat on Lincoln City around the Wolds. And given the podcast last night and the video yesterday, there's an awful lot to talk about. Obviously, yesterday I was talking about the potential departure of Tom Hopper. That's now happened. Cover that in the podcast, as I do the departure of Charlie Kendall on loan, as I do any other potential departures as well. By the way, morning Connor, morning Chris, hope you're well. Morning Blake, hope you're well. There's three names that you can see or who will be at the live Stacey West podcast on February the 9th. They're all confirmed as guests. We're at about 70% capacity now. So really important that if you do want to come to that, you visit there's an article on the website, fill in the form. We're going to oversubscribe slightly for people leaving, so there's still some scope for that. But live podcast, Mark Kennedy, Danny Butterfield, which could be interesting depending on what happens over the next couple of days. There's Liam Scully, who I've got some interesting questions for. He's going to be on the sofa or whatever we happen to sit on chatting to us. Hopefully, I'm going to have Powdy O'Connor, a couple of former players. I'm planning on doing, hopefully, just for people who are there, not for broadcast, but I'm hopefully going to put just a short quiz together, quizzing one former player about the other. Should be a little bit of fun, so it'll be a good night. Nearly, like I say, 70% capacity, so get your name down if you want to come. There's an article on the website, stacywest.net. You'll find it somewhere around the top. Get on it, get subscribed. I think it's about 7:30 start, February the 9th, Legends Lounge. It's not what I'm here to talk about. I'm not here to promote anything. And Sean Simon says, morning, mate, twice in 2 days. It's getting to that point, though, where it's critical, and every day kind of brings a new idea or something new to discuss. Morning, Bob. Bob, we will see you on Saturday, certainly before the game, potentially after. We're on a boys' night, so we'll pop in and say hello. It's almost like, when there's a general election and all of a sudden the politics coverage is everywhere and you can't get away from it. It's transfer window. We've won one at home in the one game, in the league in the last 11, 2 home games all season. We've won very, very few, and it's getting to this crucial, critical point. These next couple of days, I've said it on the podcast, I said it yesterday, they're absolutely crucial. Absolutely crucial. In my opinion, not just for the rest of the season, they could be crucial in the entire Mark Kennedy era. Lose against Cambridge, don't bring a striker in. Win against Cambridge, bring in a striker that everyone goes, great signing. Well, hey, all of this worry is gone. Not gone, admittedly, alleviated. The pressure's alleviated. That's how crucial it is. And that's 96 hours, if I do my maths correctly, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, assuming that it's midnight tonight. So the next 96 hours, 100 hours or so, could be critical in the immediate fortunes of Lincoln City Football Club. And yesterday stuff happened. It's almost like the other transfer window where we were waiting desperately for something to happen and Teo Eden left. You think that's not what we want to happen. Do you know what I mean? When you go in, make an announcement, and then the club make an announcement, not that announcement. Tom Hopper leaving, I've discussed. I'm not going to go into it any further. Charlie Kendall the same. Fully expect a couple more young lads to go out on loan. And again, if we are going to work within the idea that we're developing young players potentially for sale, and that doesn't have to be £1 million sale. That can be developing an Elita Rahui to sell to Rochdale for 50 grand. It can be that kind of level, can't it, with a sell-on fee? So it doesn't have to be selling up. You can sell down as long as you sell, from a point of zero initial investment. But I expect players like him, like Freddie Draper, potentially Sam Long, potentially Jovan Makama, to go out on loan to get some senior football to accrue some value. So that's I hate the saying, the model, but that's the model. The model is bring players in, develop them, pump them out the other side for a profit. And Jack Diamond said something really interesting in an interview today, and it got me thinking first positively and then negatively. It's on the Sky Sports website. It's not the sort of thing I usually read, but on the Sky Sports website, Jack Diamond said one of the things that influenced his move to Lincoln City was our record of helping to develop players, i.e. Brennan Johnson, who did really well here and has gone on to better things. And I can't remember his exact wording, but he basically intimates that that's one of the reasons that he came to Lincoln City. And my first thought was, yes, brilliant, that's good, isn't it? And then I wondered, and then I got to thinking about the model, and I got to thinking about something I think Chris said on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. We're talking about the finances and the board of directors kind of covering the losses at the club. And I think Chris said that it's somewhere he had read or discussed, and feel free to comment, Chris, if you did, that the plan was that they were able to do that until 2024, when hopefully a fan-led review and changes off the back of that would be implemented, not to reintroduce the wage cap in the way that it was during the COVID season, but to introduce some form of kind of financial fair play, ground leveling, so that we could then work to being more sustainable within a competitive League One environment, rather than having to be competitive by making £2 million losses, something along those lines. So 2024 was kind of that cut-off date where you think, well, football needs to have changed by then. Will it? There's a lot of hope that it will. There's also a lot of doubt that it will. But that's kind of, I think, part of the aim. And in the meantime, what we're trying to do is get a reputation for developing players, bring players in, develop them and sell them on. And we go to Anthony Scully and Teo Eden as classic examples of this. Look what happened. They came into Lincoln City. They went on to better things within their career. You could talk Brennan Johnson. You could, if you really wish to. For me, not a great example. I'll come into why in a minute. George Grant was another one. Even Zach El-Bazedi and Theo Archibald at least came in for nothing, went out for something. So that kind of fits in with this. I'm not going to say selling club. Every club's a selling club. Bournemouth are a selling club if Middlesbrough come in for a player, or Man United are a selling club if Barcelona come in. There's no such thing as a club that's not a selling club, but it's development. And then I got to thinking of the last couple of transfer windows. Like, I'm not going to judge this transfer window right now because it hasn't closed. So I'm not going to come on here and say to you, we must do this, we must do that. I will tell you what I think we need before the end of this broadcast. But I'm not gonna say, it's a disaster at this stage. It's ridiculous. It's like getting to the final chapter of a Rebus novel, not knowing who the murderer is, and putting it down and going, not reading any more of that. Don't care. Shit novel. Read the end, and then you'll know whether it's crap or not. How many times have you watched a series? There was one on Netflix. I don't know if you've watched it. It's something about a house, and people. It's an American thing, and they move into this house, and all these strange things start occurring. And it was engrossing for 5 episodes. You're thinking, God, what's going to happen? What's the end? What's the end? And then literally I got to the end and it's like, wow, that is awful. So, and a transfer window can be like that, where all that excitement, all that hype, we might get to 11 o'clock Tuesday night and it might just be utter crap. And then we can complain. No point in complaining now. No point in complaining half the way through Da Vinci's painting. The transfer window could end up with the finely painted horse, where the kid's drawn the back of it, where it looks like we're doing well, we're freeing up wage bill, and then at the end they've gone, here's a wax crayon, colour that bit in brown. Might not end up like that. We'll see. I'm not going to get angry about it. But the last couple of transfer windows have, with the greatest of respect, and I always use hindsight, had some issues. Last year's winter window was very good. We know that. We overspent £300,000. It's right there. It's been admitted by the club, and it was a good window. And whatever you think of Liam Cullen, or whatever you think of John Marquis or Morgan Whittaker, those players came in and they had an impact. All of them did. Cullen scored a goal or two. Morgan Whittaker assists and goals. John Marquis goals. We were the second highest scorers. Or the new players that came in were the second highest scorers in the transfer window. So if you took all of League One's incomings, added up all the goals they scored for their team, only Bolton's new players scored more goals for their club than Lincoln City's new players did. Remember that. So last winter was a good window. And I think, Matthew Walker, you're on board, aren't you? You are there. You are. Morning, mate. I did see something you put on Facebook earlier, saying that the last few windows have been rubbish. No, last winter's window wasn't. I didn't jump on. I don't get into conversations on Facebook if I can help it. But yeah, we've got to be objective. When we have done well, we've got to reflect that we've done well. Was this summer's window? I think the jury is still out a little bit. I mean, a couple of the lone players, Tashan certainly didn't do well. Jordan Garrick certainly hasn't done particularly well. Jack Diamond sitting in the middle. Matty Virtue did really well until he dropped out. Paddy O'Connor, I thought, was a decent signing. Charles Vernon, on and off, hot and cold. But you know what there isn't in there? And what there wasn't last summer either, and where perhaps I have a slight concern. Apologies, Matthew, if you said 2 out of the last 3 have been bad. I may have misread that. But my slight concern is, how do I put this? So let's talk about the model, first of all. So what is the model? And I know that it's an all-encompassing thing. It's not one specific thing that you need to do. But the idea, or certainly the idea as it seemed to be presented to us in Michael Appleton's first full season in charge, was that the model would be bring in young players, get a reputation for developing those players, make a profit on those players, rinse and repeat. So how do you do that? Well, first of all, you have to have the reputation for developing young players. Brennan Johnson, ding, 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 reputation gained. And with the greatest respect, he was a good player, but he came in here, it elevated his career. We got nothing from it other than reputation. Reputation sometimes is something that you can't buy, so that's good. How else do you develop young players? By having experienced players around them. Liam Bridcut, Adam Jackson, Tom Hopper, for instance, were big characters during that particular season, helping to develop some of the young players. Robbie Gotts, who came in, who was a lone player I thought could have done a lot better, and was perhaps unfortunate that we had so many good players in his position. But he spoke of Liam Bridcut going to stay with him, helping develop him. Ding, 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 box number 2 ticked. The crucial part of that whole plan is the third bit. Having the young players you bring in to sell. Teo Eden, Anthony Scully. Chris will love this bit. Came into Lincoln City at the end of their pathway at Fulham and at West Ham. Signed for us. Those clubs took a sell-on fee. We know that. Fulham took a couple of $100,000, I think, from the Teo Eden sale. I'm sure West Ham took something from the Anthony Scully. We'll find that out next year. But they came in as our players. We developed them. They moved on. George Grant, to a degree, but not the same sort of age, but had kind of come to the end of a development pathway at Nottingham Forest, moved to us as our player. Now I look at the recruitment last summer and the recruitment the summer before, and I don't see those players, not those specific players. I don't see the players coming into Lincoln City who have finished their Premier League 2 pathway. He loves it, pathway, Mr. Lamming. But I don't see those particular players. Lasse Sorensen, potentially, possibly, was the aim was that sort of player. But I think that's one area where, and I don't know, I'm not involved in the recruitment. Really easy as a bystander to go, this hasn't been good enough, that hasn't been good enough. Because, if Ted Bishop hadn't got injured perhaps last season, or hadn't struggled a little bit this season, you would be going, he's a great signing for the club. Do you know what I mean? There's Joe Walsh and Adam Jackson, brilliant signings, who have suffered injuries. There's been some elements of luck. There's been some elements of bad luck around some of our recruitment. I don't think it's been as bad as people say. And, you forget, it's easy to forget last season. They talk about how bad the summer window was, whereas actually Chris Maguire on paper was a great signing. Hakeem Delican on paper was a great signing. Both turned out to be poor signings, but on paper they were very good. And it's easy with hindsight to sit back and go, that was a shit window, when it's silly, but it's a shit window. Nobody knows whether it's a bad window or not when the window closes. It's absolutely easy as anything to go, that's rubbish, and then say later on that you've been proved wrong. But to have some degree of balance, I think, is important. And I worry a little bit that the one key element of the whole developing player strategy we seem to have shied away from. I mean, Jay Ben has come in. We're obviously looking at developing the likes of Ben and Morgan Worsfold, Greg and Ocean Gallagher. but they haven't come in from that kind of end of Premier League pathway. And I don't know maybe whether I think somebody there, Connor's put it, does Appleton's cloud contact status have an impact on the appeal for players? Potentially. Mark Kennedy still has that reach, though. He's been at Man City and Wolves, you know, he's been at these bigger clubs, Ipswich, who are the bigger club. You know, Danny Butterfield now, who's obviously been involved in the Premier League's loan market. So, you know, hopefully we can maybe see something more coming through. But I don't think that we've been able to tap into that. Why? I don't know. Is it a budgeting thing? Are we not willing to take the risk? I mean, and it is a risk. For instance, there's a lad at Chelsea called Charlie Brown, who I quite liked Charlie Brown as a striker. And I thought he's the type of player you want to be bringing in because he could be a massive hit. And he went to MK Dons and he flopped and he's gone somewhere else in our division. It might be Forest Green. And hasn't really made an impact. So it's really easy to say, well, that's what we should be doing. But actually, not every player coming out of a Premier League academy is a Theo Eden or an Anthony Scully. And I do think to a degree what we've tried to do this year, and again, I'm happy to be shot down. And Nick Oxbury, come on, I'm not even putting your comment up. More talk about ins and players out with question marks. I don't fucking know. Anyway, sorry. But you know, there's risks associated, and when you look at what we've tried to do, I think we've looked at players who we might be able to bring in, who we can put a year of experience in before we do. Tashan Oakley-Booth, Jordan Garrick, who obviously was available for transfer because he's now moved on. Potentially Jack Diamond. So maybe we're looking at players that are a little bit further down that line, but I'm not so sure. I understand what we're trying to do at key times. I understand sometimes when I look at the transfer window, because we've got to sign, like Chris Maguire on paper looked like a leader. And I remember interviewing one of the other senior players, and I won't say who because it would be remiss. And I remember saying to him, "Oh, you know, are you happy now? Are you happier that the number of leaders in the squad is building up? So there's yourself and XXX, and now you've got Chris Maguire." And the player really cleverly dodged it and just kind of said, "You know, well, me and this other senior player, we work well with youngsters." Never mentioned Chris Maguire. So perhaps there was already an understanding from the inside looking out that he wasn't the type of player that was going to bring young players on. Whereas from the outside looking in, you looked at it and thought he's just the right type of player that we need. Hakeem Adelakun, you've got to have performers who understand League One. Somebody said yesterday, we lack leaders on the field in the top 2/3 of the pitch. We do. Hakeem Adelakun, when he came in, you know, lots of League One experience, been into the Championship. He looked like the type of player that he could come in and we could have a young winger coming through who'll go, well, I'll get under Hakeem's wing and I'll learn from him. And that hasn't happened either. I'm not saying that the transfer policy is flawed. I've said before, I'm concerned a little bit when we say we're fishing in the same waters as Ipswich and things like that. You know, it worries me that, you know, that's where we're putting all our eggs. And then when they don't come off, we're short. But at the same time, it's really easy, isn't it? We've all played Football Manager. We all know what we would do. We all know what works when you're playing Football Manager, but real life ain't like that. There's no algorithms. You know, there's no artificial intelligence. And Football Manager is brilliant. Don't get me wrong. I'm sure it's way more in depth now than I can manage. And I'm sure some of today's actual football managers would find it all a little bit baffling. But football isn't like that. A player comes in who can look absolutely brilliant. All he has to do is roll his ankle on a training pitch. And I look at Dan Lundaloo. I think a lot of Dan Lundaloo's issues were, I think he got injured, didn't he? Took a knock in the pre-season at Boston. Didn't then come in until the Manchester United game. Manchester United kids got injured again in that, missed a sitter. Instantly, his confidence is down. He's not match fit. He never, ever got going for us. And his experiences at Cheltenham and now moving on to Bolton prove that there's a decent League One player in there. So from a recruitment point of view, easy to say he was a rubbish signing, but actually he was a good signing, I think, in terms of the ability. You know, people forget Brucknell and Cuffy last year, good signing, Luis Fiorini, good signing, but these are players that we weren't going to sign at the end of their deal. And that for me is the one thing that has really been missing. I mean, even that, to be fair, you look at TJ Ioma, he was probably the last one of that kind of Premier League academy, you know, England honours type of player that we were able to bring in on a permanent deal. Ben House, yes, but he'd dipped down into non-league. But TJ was probably the last one that came to the end of his pathway at a Premier League club and came in. And obviously TJ struggled for one reason or another. Still a big asset to the club. But you look at, you know, I think Cambridge have got a couple from Spurs, and You look at a couple of the other clubs around us who are picking up young players from academies who are coming out of academies and going into senior football. I just wonder if that's where we're missing a trick. Is it because now those players are not available to us in terms of wages? You know, we were in a good place when we signed Scully and Teo Eden because we moved a lot of high earners on and we were able to be quite agile. But then this window, Jamie Robson, going to be a big earner, moved on. Tom Hopper, definitely going to be a big earner because he will have been on pre-COVID wages, moved on. We freed up a loan spot with Jordan Garrick. I don't know, I'm just right on the eve of this season. Anthony Scully left, and remember, was technically no replacement came in for him. He would have been on pre-COVID wages. I have a huge amount of hope that the next couple of days will bring 2 footballers to Lincoln City Football Club that I can go, finally. The way I felt when it said Matty Virtue had signed. He was a deadline day signing. He snuck in. People weren't all that bothered about signing Virtue. I remember that really clearly. It was, we need a striker. We need a striker. Virtue came in. That's not a striker. And what happened? Matty Virtue went on to arguably be the best player in the squad up until the moment he got injured. And he got injured on the field. You can't say, oh, we signed injury-prone players. You know, Matty Virtue was injured during a game. You saw it happen. He pulled up. These things, those sorts of injuries, it happens. It happens. But just remember that when you come in to judge this transfer window. You know, if a player might come in who you go, well, that's not a Liam Bridcut replacement because you haven't signed him on Football Manager, or that's not such and such a great striker because he hasn't scored 20 goals a season for the last 3 or 4 seasons. But he might actually be exactly what we need. So what do we need? Well, as I've already touched upon, it would be nice to have a project player. I think a 1 or 2 like an Eden or a Scully. I don't see that happening, unfortunately. But I think that they were 2 really good signings for the football club, and I think, you know, it's really easy, isn't it, to say we need to do that again, because it doesn't happen like that. You don't sign a central midfielder like Teo Eden and he turn into the best left back in the division by accident. And was that Appleton's coaching? Was that the coaching team at the time, or was it, you know, a perfect storm of reasons? Did those players thrive because actually, rather than wilt under the pressure of 9,000 fans going, oh, when a cross doesn't quite land on someone's head, they were in empty stadiums and there was no pressure, and they were able to do what they did at Premier League 2 level in front of nobody at all, with only the manager shouting the instructions out to them. Potentially, I think we've got to bear that in mind. You know, is that why TJ was so superb in his first season and has struggled since? Possibly. The power of the crowd. You know, when people say, I pay my money, I can boo, I can sigh, I can shout abuse, I can do this and that. The impact that has, I think, is greater than anybody actually realises. And I think part of the reason we got to the playoffs in that season, if I'm entirely honest, is because we weren't there to see it. There was young players who didn't have the pressure heaped upon their shoulders. But anyway, that's that. So what do we need? So I'd like to see that sort of player come in. It's probably more of a summer thing, even though we signed Eden and Scully in the winter window. I don't see that coming in. We have got to sign a striker. Look, if you're like, I typed a tweet out yesterday, which I then binned off because I knew that it would trigger some people and it was deliberately kind of antagonistic. And sometimes I put stuff out that kind of has a dig at people. It has a little bit more impact because, you know, without being arrogant, I've quite a big reach in terms of followers, 5,000-6,000 or something like that now, 5,500. If I put something out and it's kind of having a dig generally to one of their tweets, and so many people yesterday put, we've got to sign a striker, got to be one coming in now. And I actually typed out, if your hot take on the transfer window is Lincoln City need to sign a striker, don't bother, because that's like having a hot take of breathing in and then going, I need to breathe out. Obvious. But that's not right. I shouldn't have put that. I shouldn't be antagonistic. You're quite right to say we need a striker. Of course we are. It was my anger at knowing that we need to sign a striker and everybody saying it. When the club sent me, they're brilliant, to be fair to them. They give me a little heads up and a couple of hours before saying, this is what's going to happen. This is when it's going out. And I remember seeing the transfers going out and just thinking, oh no. Not because I have to package it in any way, because I don't. I almost feel for them, you know, when you're expecting a striker to come in and the news is going to be 2 strikers going out and you, oh my Lord, I feel for them. And it's, the club obviously have a reason for doing it this way. They've got the offer for Tom. It's a good offer. It's good for Tom. You know, I've got no problem with him leaving, as I've said. But it's obvious we need a striker. Obvious, and we're going to go into Saturday's game with Ben House, and if we need to take Ben off after 60 minutes because he's got a knock, it'll be Jovan, or it'll be a square peg in a round hole like Mo Shadipo or Jack Diamond or Danny Mandrew. Who knows? Maybe Danny Mandrew might turn out to be a brilliant central striker. No, Nick. No. Sorry. Nick. Honestly, if you ever type in Nick, if in the next 96 hours you type a message out to me and it has a question mark at the end, delete it, don't send. Top tip. So, of course, we need a striker. Do we need two? Craig Robertson. Like Craig, we have butted heads on Lincoln City for 5 or 6 years now. We very rarely agree on anything. And he picked up, I said on my dog walk yesterday, we need one striker. I said, we don't need two strikers. And he correctly picked me up on it, because earlier in the transfer window, I'd said, you can't go into a season without 3 strikers. Sorry. Nick is amusing me. He really does. He's incessant. You know, like when a child wants feeding and he just doesn't stop at you all day. That's like Nick all the way through the transfer window with me. He's like a child that needs feeding, but less lovable. So anyway, so yes, we need 2 strikers to start a 46-game season. 3 strikers rather. That's my opinion. Not a hypocrite. I'm not going back on that. You've got the EFL Trophy. You've got the FA Cup. You've got the League Cup. You play Saturday, Tuesday, 4 or 5 times in all the way through October, through November. You've got to have strikers. If you want to go 2 up top from the start, there's no point in having 2 strikers because you can't bring anybody on. We've very rarely had more than 3 strikers. Matt Green, Ollie Palmer, Matt Reed was kind of a trio that we had, wasn't it, for a while? Can't even remember which strikers were in the National League. Matt Reed, Adam Marriott, Johnny Margus, who moved on. Theo Robinson came in, but we don't tend to have all that many. From the start of the season, 3 strikers, bare minimum. I stand by it. Right now, we've got to sign 1 striker. There's no point in us signing a striker and people going, but we needed 2 strikers. We've got 21 games left. Realistically, if Jovan or Freddie don't go out, you've got the extra striker. You can, if you want to go 2 up top later in the game, Mandrew, Jack Diamond can play there. It's imperative we sign 1, because if you start with 1 up top, you've got to have a striker come on if there's an injury, if you want to give a different dimension later on. So there's no doubt in my mind we have got to sign a striker. To say we've got to sign 2 with 21 games to go is the sort of transfer approach that saw us sign Lee Angle in the title winning season. Really. The year that we won the title, you might not remember this, you might do. Deadline day, everybody wanted us to sign a striker. Everybody. We had Matt Reed, we had John Akindi, and it was all about signing Danny Hilton was the player. Everybody thought we were going to sign Danny Hilton. And I remember Danny Cowley, name drop, actually rang me on that deadline day window and said, Gary, we're not going to sign Danny Cowley. We're not going to sign Danny Hilton. We're going to sign Lee. Explain why. He said he wanted the cover, but we weren't going to be able to sign a player on big wages who was then going to go straight into the team, because they wouldn't go in the team because John Akindi was the starting centre forward. This is why John Akindi was the starting centre forward. And Lincoln City can't afford to load up on strikers. We're not MK Dons. We don't spend 115% of what we earn on players. We're trying to do it within a reasonable budget. We've got to sign a striker, sign 2, it could be decadent. If we had a loan spot open, then I would say, yeah, sign a striker. 1 permanent, 1 loan to cover. But then if the loan player doesn't get in, you run the risk of not being able to tap into that club and the loan market the next season. So it's a fine balancing act. The other player that we need, 100%, absolutely, without a doubt, is a central midfielder. And it's a central midfielder who in my opinion, is 23 or older, has played between more than 50 games at senior level in his career, ideally at League One. If he's League Two, he's got to have played 100 games in a top League Two side. He's got to have drive, he's got to have organisational skills, he's got to be able to play the holding role, he's got to be the heartbeat of the team. We don't have that at the moment. It's why we've struggled in recent weeks. Greatest respect to Max Sanders and to Lasse Sorensen. They're good in a 3. Sanders is exquisite in a 2 when he's got the right player next to him. Sanders and Bridcut side by side. Oh, I would have loved to have seen that. A Fitley and Bridcut. Allowing Max Sanders to go and do what he wanted. I think on his day, Max Sanders has the potential to be a better midfielder than Conor McGrandles was for Lincoln. But he's got to get more consistency. Problem with Max Sanders is when he's bad, he's bad. Lass is a hard worker. In a 3, he's great. But in a 2, I think, there's little rushes of blood. There was a game earlier in the season, might have been Fleetwood at home, where a ball came into the box and instead of holding his line, instead of keeping his defensive line, he's rushed out to a player, the player's beat him, put the cross in, bosh, the other team scored. So that is a sort of youthful exuberance in midfield that costs you points. That's why we need leaders. That's why whoever it was who said that we don't have leaders, I think it was Martin Green on Twitter, I understood what he means. We don't have leaders in the positions where we need the leaders. Central midfield. If you would say to me, which one of those positions would you rather have? First of all, I'd say miss out on either and we're in trouble. Fact. Well, sorry, not fact, is it? It's opinion. So, opinion based on what I believe to be fact. Probably better. But I'd say the midfielder. Because I think if you don't concede goals, this Lincoln City team can nick one. It won't be a pretty watch. It'll be 21 games of, the odd 1-0, something like that. But if we stay in a positive points tally to games played, 21 played, 22 points, we stay up this season. Might not be pretty, but that's got to be the primary aim. It's got to be the primary objective. Going down would be catastrophic. Look at the teams that have gone down. How many challenging at the top of the table this season? Doesn't happen. It does happen, but it hasn't happened this season. Actually, it was a bad League One last season, really bad. We had 52 points. We were comfortable mid-April. 52 points now. You're only comfortable on the last day of the season for this campaign. Sign a central midfielder. Get that kind of spine of the team with Ben House still through up top and fit. We get through it. Sign a striker and not a central midfielder. You've got a huge, great big gap in the middle of the park, and teams like Charlton, average teams with big name players who are not organised well and not playing well, will take you apart. We saw it when we went there. It'll happen time and again if we don't sign a midfielder. So central midfielder, said at the beginning of the season, was the most crucial player that we could sign in the transfer window. Matty Virtue came in, we got it right. A little bit later in the window perhaps than we would have liked, but we got it right. Let's remember Jez George and the recruitment team's hits as well as misses, please. I think that's do you know what I mean? I think that's fair to say. Who's put an angry face? There's 6 people put an angry face. Are you not angry at me? That'd be harsh. So that's where we are. That's how I see the next couple of days panning out. It's strange, I think, to think that one game, and I never say must-win game. It's not a must-win game. Lose it, we're not relegated. I said that yesterday. Lose it, we're not relegated. Lose it. It dictates where we go for the rest of the season, but our fate's still in our own hands. So it isn't a must-win game at all. But it's one that, if we don't win, it does give us an indication of what the rest of the season is going to be. That's why it's so crucial. That's why it's so crucial. And then what happens off the field over the remaining 96 hours or however many 110, 12 hours of the transfer window there are left dictates an awful lot. I'm going to be bold and say the next 100 odd hours are the most crucial that Mark Kennedy will ever have had in his career as a coach and a head coach. Since hanging up his boots, they'll be the most crucial he's ever had. Because if it goes wrong, the next 96, 100 hours, Mark Kennedy's going to be fighting an uphill battle, whether it's his fault or not, on recruitment, on players available. If we get to Wednesday morning, we don't have a midfielder and striker in the building, a new one, both, and we don't have at least a point and a good performance against Cambridge, his job is looking very, very challenging through February, March and April. Whether that's his own fault would be harsh to say that, but it looks challenging in my opinion. And he will need to dig out all of his reserves of strength and his resilience and his tactical knowledge in order to turn down, if we haven't signed those players, what a threadbare squad. He says the idea is that we're stronger coming out of the transfer window when we go into it. Well, Charlie Kendall wasn't with us when we went into it and went out. We've replaced Jamie Robson with Harry Boyes. We've replaced Jordan Garrett with Mo Shadipo. We've now got rid of Tom Hopper. We've lost Matty Virtue for 10 weeks. It doesn't take a genius, does it, to realise exactly what we need. Matty Virtue, replace. Tom Hopper, replace. Then it's in the summer where I believe perhaps the club look at an element of the recruitment. 3 strikers, please. Are there any players that we could take a punt on coming out of a Premier League academy? The next Teo Eden, the next Anthony Scully. It's really easy to say it into a phone while I'm walking around the Wolds. I'd say it's damn sight harder to actually make it happen, and that's one thing that we have to bear in mind. Right, so let's pick up on a couple of things. Adam Butler says, guessing you've read the Ross Burberry to Derby story. Disappointing if true, given the plaudits he came with. Yeah, we covered it on the podcast last night. I don't want to kind of cover the same ground too much, but it is disappointing. People saying things like, I hope we get compensation. Yeah, at the end of the day, if I'm at Jackson Building Centres and I come with a big sales reputation and 6 months later a bigger merchant comes in and offers me more money and I go, Jackson Building Centres don't get compensation for that, do they? So players, managers are one thing, but head of performance, I don't think so. It's a job. Really disappointing. Again, a little bit concerned over some of the players that people leaving. Jordan McCann, for instance, going off to Blackburn. Joe Hutchinson going off to Grimsby, the stats guy. We are losing people, and I know it's good that we have people that other teams want, so it proves our recruitment's good, but you have got to be able to hold on to those people. But there were a lot of other people at the football club, by the way, around the backroom area who, do a good job, who haven't left us. So we'll see. Hopefully, whatever Ross has put in place is something that we can carry on. So we'll see. We'll see the long-term effects of that. So I'm not going to go through lots of people saying morning, so I really appreciate that. Steve Turner says we've got Brennan Johnson is probably our best player for a season. The season we nearly went to the championship, not just about money. Yeah, that was just about money. I think though Steve wanted that season because everybody was on a level playing field. So it was, there was the salary cap. I remember Portsmouth couldn't sign anybody because they had to get one out. Ipswich couldn't sign anybody because they had to move people out. So it was all about numbers. It was all about wage caps. And there's no surprise that our recruitment team did the best work when they were working on a level playing field with everybody else, in my opinion. Let's have a look. Connor says, what would be worse situation, bringing in bodies for the sake of it or leaving the window as we are? And I hope neither is the case. The worst would be staying as we are, because at least if you bring bodies in for the sake of it, they could be on a 6-month contract, like Jacob Davenport, who actually, incidentally, left us during the window, so we're 2 midfielders down. But like Jacob Davenport. So you would be better doing that and at least having the bodies there to call on if needed than not having the bodies at all and going into like games with 2 or 3 subs like we did last season, which was an utterly ridiculous situation for us to be in, unfortunately. Excuse me, Julian Sims, is it a worry we're not going to get anything for Regan this transfer window? Can you see him signing a new contract? Lure of giving him the captaincy. New contract, I doubt it, if I'm honest. I think he's a championship player in the waiting. Is it a worry? Not a worry. Disappointment, we're not going to get anything for him, but it would be equally as disappointing if he moved this transfer window for £100,000-200,000 and then we go into the rest of the season without Regan Poole. So it's about a fine balance, isn't it? Obviously what we would have liked is somebody to have come in and bought Regan Poole over the summer, but cost of living and all that sort of stuff meant that clubs weren't really buying. I don't think there'd been a movement in the championship halfway through the summer window. Maybe even towards the end of the summer window, very few players were signing for clubs. So I think that we were done a little bit by the economic situation. I think that there would have been a Wigan or a Blackpool might like to have paid money out for Regan Poole in the summer. The ideal situation would be he goes, but if he does, what do the people say then? Well, we're selling our best players, we've got no ambition. So it's a no-win situation. For me, right now, and I'm sure the club won't agree with me, I'd like to keep Regan Poole till the end of the season. And if he goes and gets a move to a bigger club, at least other players wanting to come in will look at it and go, well, Regan Poole did well there, and now he's playing in the Championship. So Gary Burr says Oakley Booth, massive disappointment, send him back. Yeah, I've seen flashes of Oakley Booth. Derby, he came on. I thought he did really well. I think he came on for Ben House, didn't he? I think House got injured early doors. Might be wrong about that, but I thought, no, he didn't. The House scored, didn't he? Someone got injured. But anyway, I thought Oakley Booth has shown flashes, but I think he's been injured. Send him back. I probably tend to agree right now, and hopefully he can come in and prove me wrong. I don't see unless you play a 3 and he's at the head of a 3, I don't see where Tashan Oakley Booth fits into our model, our tactic rather. If we play a 3 with 2 holding midfielders and Oakley Booth, brilliant. But if your midfield's Oakley Booth, Max Sanders and Lasse Sorensen, it lacks the drive and the energy, not the energy, but it lacks kind of the drive and the experience and the organisational skills, I think, to play League One football to a good level on a regular basis. Matthew Walker, it's a worry leaving it this late in the window. Do you know what? Again, it's hard because we're not sitting around going, we'll leave it till late in the window. If we wanted to get certain deals have been done by clubs who have paid fees for players, but our economic situation, our financial situation means that we're not doing that. So we're not sitting on our hands as a football club going, we'll wait till then, we'll leave it till late in the window. We're in chains for the players that we've done due diligence on and worked hard on for 6 months. So it's the way that the market goes, unfortunately. So I don't think we've left it late in the window. I think that the way that the whole market is geared is such that you're waiting for moves to be made and then you can get left short, as we know. It's a worry, but it's football as a whole rather than Lincoln City's recruitment. I'd personally like to see a staggered window so that, let's say, the Premier League finishes on a Monday or the Premier League and Championship on a Monday, and then League Two and League One on a Friday. So that when things move in the Championship and the Premier League, there's a little bit more clarity and a little bit sort of more time to get deals done over the course of the week. But if you did that, somebody would know how to exploit it. Edward Brett, can somebody lock Nick in a cupboard, please? Unfortunately, I think that he gets signal in his cupboard, which so it wouldn't be any different. Rob Scott says, have we signed 5 new players? Is that what this is all about? 5 massive signings completed last night? No. Sean Lass had a great start to the season, has dropped off again. Yeah, he had 2 games where I thought he looked really good. I don't think it's a dropping off as such. I just think certain games suit him and certain ones don't. And I think at the beginning of the season where, we were playing a kind of a 3 in midfield, that suits Lass. It suits Conor McGrandles. Conor McGrandles, I thought, dropped off when he was in a 2. Lass drops off in a 2. Very similar players. And I know that people say, I'd rather have Conor McGrandles than Lasse Sorensen. They're interchangeable. Would you rather have magnolia walls or cream walls? Not, in my opinion, not a lot of difference. The only difference is Conor was a little bit more experienced. And Lass has the potential, I think, is further down his thing, further down his career to change. So, Monster midfield, says Ed Brett. I think that he's got the turning circle of a double-decker bus, and that would probably be the only thing that did for him. But I understand the calls. Craig's on board. Morning, mate. It's not Mark Kennedy's fault. He is, after all, lauded as a head coach. There's a clear disconnect between what Jez thinks we need and what Mark and Appleton have thought we needed. Certainly not in the first transfer window, I don't think. I don't think that there is the disconnect. I think, for instance, there's no clear pattern of play this season. So it isn't like with Mark Kennedy's gone, well, we're going to go, if he says we're going to go 4-1-4-1, and then the recruitment team have got the list of players, the way it works, I don't know if you've seen it, Craig, you had to get on one of Jez's presentations. It's brilliant because you get a real insight into how it works. And the manager is given a portfolio of, let's say, 100 players that the club have researched, have gone right deep into, then they narrow it down, and each position that the manager says that we need and that the club believe that we need is presented to the manager, and he's then given a pick of the players. And if he's got one that he wants himself, we go away and we do the due diligence on that. So I don't see that there is that disconnect. There may have been in the summer when we were down the line with certain players and then Mark Kennedy came in and wanted other players. But the first signing that we made, Tashan, was somebody that Mark Kennedy had earmarked himself earlier in his career. So I think there's a clear disconnect between what fans think we need and what we're recruiting. And again, I go back to the whole, I hope you caught it, because obviously it was kind of our discussion online, but I go takes back to the kind of 3 strikers at the beginning of the season. And in an ideal world, of course, we'd go with 3 strikers. I've just covered that. But, you know, the club say, well, we want one for every position and we play one up front. What isn't helpful is when we then go, right, we'll start 3-5-2, because then that blows out all of the recruitment and everything that we've planned. So I think there's a disconnect, but I don't think it's as clear as saying what Jez wants and what Mark Kennedy wants are different. There's too many other people in the chain. There's too much of a process for it to simply be 2 people not properly connecting. But I can understand where you're coming from. Absolutely. No, it's not Lincoln, but Jody Jones to Notts County, good signing. Not sure he's the same player, mate, to be honest, Sean. 3 ACL injuries. He's done remarkably well to even be kicking a ball still. I was chatting to one of our players about Lewis Monsma's injury, similar to what Jody Jones had. And the player said, Lewis is not being rushed back, because if he rushes back and he does that injury again and it aggravates that injury, it could be the end of your career. Jody Jones has come back from 3. You're not going to be the same player after that. Mike Smith, Oakley Booth, $6 a week sitting on the bench. Yeah, prove it, Mike. Sorry, mate, but whenever I see people assume a wage, which is wrong, it really annoys me. Sorry, mate, but it does. Honestly, where do you get the $6 a week from? Please tell me. Where do you get the $6 a week from? Pop it in the comments, mate, please. And hoping and guessing Tyler Walker revealed on Monday. Well, he did a minor tear of his ACL in October and was out of action until middle of February. So personally, I'm hoping to get a player who's not injured come in. And I'd love to see Tyler come back to the club. Do you know what? I'm not going to deny that. You're spot on. But at this moment in time, a player who hasn't played football for 3 months because he's injured is not what Lincoln City need. It isn't. But longer term, it may well be. Yeah, I buy that. I understand that. So, right, look, 46 minutes in. I've done nearly 2 miles now, chatting to you. I hope that you have enjoyed it. I hope that you enjoy Saturday more. I hope that by Wednesday morning, when I do a dog walk, and believe me, there will be a dog walk on Wednesday morning, come hell or high weather, it's a lot more positive, and there's a lot more comments where people are going, that was a good window. We had that last time out. We had a good window last time, remember? Signed 4 strikers last time. John Marquis, Liam Cullen, Ben House and Charlie Kendall, and we still didn't improve our points per game. Nothing really changed. Nothing really changed from deadline day. In fact, we'd picked up many of our points through January. So points per game was the same. But a good window, 5 goals. If we bring 5-10 goals into the team between now and the end of the season, we get enough points to stay up, then we sit back and we start again. And then it answers a lot of these questions, the so-called disconnect between Jez and Mark. If it is there, it'll become more evident or less evident over the course of 2 or 3 transfer windows. You'll begin to pick up on it in interviews. So we'll see. We'll absolutely see what happens. I'm worried. I'll be honest. I'm worried. But I once had to go on a worry management course as part of when I had stress and anxiety. And the woman said, right, what do you worry about? And I told her, she was right. Those things are either not going to happen, and so you're worrying for no reason, or they are going to happen, and you're wasting time now worrying about something that you can't change. Worry is pointless. If you have to worry, as soon as you start thinking about it, I'll tell you what, I'll go and sit in a room and I'll worry about that later. And then just have a worry 20 minutes where you go and sit there and go, oh, that's going to happen. And then you go out and park it. Do that. Go to the game tomorrow. Don't worry about transfers. Don't get caught up in scaremongering. Go to the game. Enjoy the game, hopefully. See what happens Tuesday, and then Tuesday morning is the time to react. Tuesday morning's the time for Mr. Oxbury to send me question marks and notes. It's the time for recriminations. It's the time for finger pointing, or it's the time for going, okay, they're good signings. Let's see where we go from there. I fucking hope it's the last one. I really, really do. Up the Imps.